hosts Andrew Clark and Chris Emery. This is designed to be a discussion on all things life and faith. We hope this serves as a weekly resource and encouragement to you.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Bayview Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Andrew, joined as always by Christopher Emery.
Well,
how are you?
I'm doing good, man. So good to be here, because what our listeners don't know is there was a very real chance I wasn't going to be here.
Yeah.
Because I think I'd given you instructions. If I'm not here, It's not because I'm the regal Chris Emery. It's because I'm the honorable Chris Emery. Because I was going to be at jury duty today, and I was all prepared, man. I was ready. I was ready to go in there and frankly play the pastor card pretty heavy. So I got dismissed, but they called it off this morning. So I was willing to do my civil duty, but I got the pass.
Sweet.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad that you are here and that you can remain regal.
Always regal. I'm glad I'm here because of our guest. Introduce our guest.
Yes, we are joined today by a good friend and another local pastor here in the Traverse City area, Mr. Sam Javed. How are you, buddy?
Oh, man. Feeling good. Feeling good. I like that this room is nice and cool and ready to sit down and have a little chit-chat.
Yes, it is cool, which is that's not always the case for this room, so I'm pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it feels good. Samuel, do we have to go by Samuel? Is that how you like it? Is that how you prefer?
I mean, if you're going to be the honorable, maybe I should go by my biblical name, Samuel. No, Sam is fine.
All right, we'll go with Sam.
Yeah, we're going to do Sam.
Sam. But yeah, Sam, you're a local pastor, youth pastor at what church? Kind of give us just a fill in the listener of who is Sam Javed.
Yeah, so right now I'm at First Congregational Church, so on the base of the peninsula, and I just started working there, I don't know, I think it was second week of April was kind of when I started. And then prior to that, I was at Faith Reformed for about 3 years.
Sweet.
And I love that I get to do youth ministry here because where I grew up.
Very cool.
And so I think it's like a privilege to be able to do that. Andrew understands that too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's not a huge, I feel like, learning curve for ministry, people, culture, that kind of thing. Never thought I would go into ministry, frankly, for a lot of reasons, but I'm just happy that God's like, yeah, I want you to do ministry, and you can do it in your hometown. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah. No, that's a good call. Yeah, moving to a new area and learning the culture curve is always kind of an adjustment period, so that's a big win.
That's true. Mm-hmm. So you were born and raised in Traverse City?
Not born and raised, no.
Okay.
So my mom worked for Marriott for about, 15, 20 years. And when she got into the hotel industry, she was working her way up the corporate ladder and met and married my dad. And they lived in St. Louis, Missouri, which is where I was born. So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. And then we did a whole lot of moving after that. So like 2.5 years later, my brother was born in Evansville, Indiana, Adam.
Okay.
And then, I think just as my mom started to do that, climb up the corporate ladder, required moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a lot of that. Okay. And I think the longest period we settled prior to Traverse City was Williamsburg, Virginia.
Oh, wow.
I think. So it basically was born in St. Louis. Brother was born 2.5 years later, did a bunch of moving, was in Michigan for, I think, a year or so, moved to Virginia, was there for 3 or 5 years. Then we moved to Washington, D.C. for 9 months.
Wow.
And then we moved to Traverse City.
Wow.
And so I've been here since I was 10 years old. So,
so all that moving before the age of 10,
mm-hmm.
and then 10-year-old stayed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and then I think that was not fun.
Yeah,
it was not fun. But and I think moving here was the hardest move. Because, once you start to get to the end of grade school, you start to form those friendships. Those things start clicking, right?
Yep.
And you've been going to parties and all that kind of stuff. And I never had any of that. So when I moved here, it was tough. It was tough to integrate and do all that. But
everybody already had kind of their friend groups that they had kind of been with since kindergarten, kind of things like that.
Right, yeah. And so then it wasn't as hard for my brother because he was younger. So he had a little bit more time to do all that. But but then growing up here, I realized, like, man, this is a really beautiful area to be in. There's a lot going on, and then even ministry wise, there's a lot you can be involved in and know what people are up to. But so that's kind of what led me here to Traverse City.
Okay,
very cool.
So then you've been here now for 15, 20, 30 years. I don't know how old you are, Sam, but
30 years.
Been here for 30 years.
You're taller than me, so you're older than me.
Yeah.
Just reverting back to grade school.
Do we really want to go down that path? Like, do you really want to start identifying age based on height?
Well, it's just like in middle school.
That's how I was in middle school.
It's just like in middle school, like you see the one guy with the beard.
Yeah.
The man-child. You know what I'm talking
man,
about?
he must be a teacher. Oh, he's 6? Okay.
Yeah. The man-child. And you're like, oh, well, okay. That's just how it's going to work. Yeah. No. So let's see. So I'm turning, my birthday is actually, it's the 25th. So when's the 25th? I don't even know what day. But this week, I'm turning 29.
Yeah, today's the 21st, so yeah.
So
Sweet,
19 years.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so you guys get established.
So you're married.
You
right?
are married now,
married.
yep.
I am married. Got 2 kiddos.
Okay, married, 2 kids. So how long you been married?
7 years in August.
Nice, man.
Awesome.
How old are your kids?
Nora is 4. She just turned 4. And she is like, she is a full-on human being. That's what I'll say. Yeah. And, but yeah, she is just amazing, super, super energetic, super full of life. And then my son Josiah is 1.5 years.
Very cool.
And much more observant. Kind of wants to know the lay of the land. He's not as quick to jump in, but yeah. So married to my wife Sarah, 7 years. Met playing basketball.
Sweet.
That's what's up.
Very cool.
That's
Mhm.
awesome.
Married a baller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice.
Met at basketball, bonded over Jesus, got married in the church. I mean, you can just write that in a
Bring
book,
it on.
right?
Bring it on. I love it.
So good, dude. Okay, so let's go, young Sam, young Adam, like family life. You're here in Traverse City. I mean, you're in ministry now.
Mm-hmm.
Has church and ministry, has that kind of been always the norm for the Javeds or for you? Or like what's that dynamic? Like, how did you find yourself now being a youth pastor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so no. Church was like the thing where mostly when I was with my grandparents, it was that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you're with us, we'll go to church, which wasn't very often because, how my grandparents lived in Elma, Michigan, have lived there forever. So when we're moving around the country, we're only going to church on the holidays when we come to their house.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my mom's side. But my dad's side, so my dad's a Muslim. So he practices Islam. So there's just a different set of beliefs and emphasis on like how the calendar year works and what dates are important and view of God. So growing up, my mom and my dad, they would talk about God, and it was kind of like an agree to disagree type thing. And I think that's pretty normal for kind of our culture, right? We've got a lot of different beliefs going on in our culture, and my parents, they were focused on their careers, and they knew they believed in God. My dad knew that, hey, I believe in God. We call him Allah, and sure, we believe in Jesus as a prophet, but we don't believe that he's God's son. And my mom would say the opposite. Like, no, I believe in God, and I believe that Jesus is God's son. And they would just agree to disagree. And
interesting.
And so that was kind of the perspective. Now, my grandparents, on the other hand, they were always very definitive. They're like, there
Sure.
is only one God. Especially my grandma. My grandma is probably the reason that I follow Jesus today.
Okay.
And I've told her that.
Very cool.
So yeah. So growing up though, like, what was the influence there? Very minimal. Like my dad, even with his faith, he would teach us some of the prayers and talk about the holidays, and he would try his best to teach me and my brother what that looked like and how to do that. And sometimes we go to mosque and stuff like that. It was pretty infrequent though. And yeah, so I would say that was the same way with church, like pretty infrequent. We would go and do that. My dad though, he just wasn't around that much.
Okay.
So my dad, I have a great relationship with him. Just growing up, he just wasn't around. My parents. So my mom was my dad's second marriage.
Okay.
So he had 3 kids before that, and so my older half siblings, and so he was going back and forth a lot between us, visiting them, visiting us,
Sure.
finding work, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think growing up, it was just kind of like I believed that there was a God, but who that God was, I was just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, and you can answer this, in your being in your household though, with older siblings, they're not in the house with you guys, so it is just you and your younger brother Adam.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of, I'm just thinking through the lens of like an older sibling, like, was it middle school, high school? Did you feel that tension of like, I wonder what bro's getting, what's he hearing, like I don't know, what dad's not around, what kind of weight did you feel in that sense?
Yeah. So I mean, I think growing up for us, we just didn't care. We didn't care about the religion thing necessarily. What we cared about was sports. Like that was the thing that gave me and my brother peace.
Yeah.
Because our life was kind of chaotic. And it was just like, we just need something to give us peace. So like when we moved to Traverse City, my parents bought a restaurant, Antipasta's Italian Cafe. And so they owned that for about 5 years, but they bought that restaurant around 2005. And then the recession hit and there was all kinds of, right? So that happened. That was super stressful on my parents. And then around that same time, the restaurant ended up closing and my parents got a divorce and we had no money. My mom was bankrupt. And so we lost the house. So we lived like a pretty middle class life. And then we went from that to living in like a 600-700 square foot duplex. So, and it was around that time that my mom and my grandma specifically was like, I want you to go try and play basketball. And I was like, absolutely not. Every single kid that I know at my school that plays sports, I do not like. I do not like their character. Man, I was like the comic book nerd. I was like drawing Star Wars comics. I was good being that guy.
Yeah.
And then they're like, yeah, you're going to go play basketball. I've never touched a basketball in my life.
Wow.
So tried out in 7th grade. Hated it. A week after I got cut, I made it to the last day. Probably just because I was tall, to be honest.
Right.
And you're like, for people who can't see, you're like 6'5", so you're the prototypical like coach sees you in the hallway and is like, "What are you doing, kid? Get to try."
Come on.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
dude.
exactly.
That's exactly what it was. I'm like, don't you know I'm terrible at this? Like, you can see this, right? And so I got cut the last day, and I was like, oh, good, man. I'm glad. Oh, and I played with I tried out with a broken arm, by the way. So my grandma and my mom were like, yeah, go try it. I'm like, do you not see the deal here? Like,
no way.
So after that, though, I just felt this fire. Like, I don't know. I didn't know what it was. It was competitiveness, but I had no idea what it was. And I was like, dude, I like this. And so that was my outlet. And then my brother got into it, and basketball just became our thing.
Cool.
So didn't care about religion. Could care less. It was all about basketball, sports, and that was it.
Yeah.
It probably, faith and wrestling with that didn't kick in until after high school for me.
Okay.
My brother, on the other hand, he started going to Elevate, and he has his own story, but he would even say like, yeah, I mean, I went, but I didn't really know Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but for me, I was like, I just got done with high school, played a year of junior college basketball, came home because my grades were terrible. I was like, yeah, I should probably just focus in on school, and had nothing to do. So I'm like, hey, I think I'm going to party. I think that's what I'm going to do. And I got lost in it. And it was in that moment that I was confronted with the living God, and I realized, like, okay, I've heard this story about God my entire life, and I thought I knew who you were, but actually I have no idea. But I'm going to find out. If it takes the rest of my life, I'm going to find out.
Wow.
And so I wasn't even like, yeah, Jesus. It was just, I want to find out who God is.
So take us down that path a little bit then, because that's probably a place where a lot of people have found themselves. Maybe some of our listeners are even at that spot, don't really know who this is, but something's drawn me to it. What steps did you take? They'd be like, hey, something's in me. I'm drawn. Where'd that send you?
So, yeah, and like giving you guys the Cliff Notes version, right? Like
Sure.
Everyone's got a life story, but it's you gotta figure out what's relevant. So what happened was I had an experience in my bedroom, and then from that experience, I just remember being like, I don't know who God is. The only reference point I had was there was this thing called the Bible, and that's all I knew. I knew about the Quran too, but I didn't know where that was. I knew where our Bible was in our house. My mom kind of had it on display, right? Like it was on a shelf. Wasn't being used for anything. It was just, hey, look, like we got a Bible on it. This identifies culturally who we are.
Yeah.
So I grabbed that Bible, I dust it off, I open it. I don't remember what version it was, but I remember opening it, and it actually said, before you read this, you need to understand that there is a Savior, Jesus Christ, and he came and he died for your sins, and you need to confess with your mouth that this is who he is, and that he's your Savior, and that he's forgiven you of your sins. And I just believed it. And I was like, yeah, I believe it. So that was it, just mere faith. So then I'm like opening this Bible, and I'm like, yeah, it's a book. So I start reading it like it's a book. And I was like, what is this? So I'm like, I open up to Genesis. I'm like, yeah, this sounds familiar. And then, eventually you get to like Leviticus. And you're like, what does this have to do with anything? So that's how that was. And it was like that for about 6 months.
Interesting.
So in that 6 months, it was like right after that, I met Sarah. And so I remember being in my bedroom the night that I came to Christ. So that night before I started reading that Bible, I said, Lord, whoever you are, I'll do whatever you ask. I just asked one thing. And if I don't have it, that's fine. I'm just going to ask that one day I would be a husband and a father. That's all I want. So like, I think it was maybe 4 weeks later, I met Sarah. Wow. We were on an intramural basketball team and paid no attention to her. Like, she was the only female there, and she was a baller. Like, I was very intimidated. Like, and she's probably going to watch this and be like, yeah, she'll just chuckle because she doesn't feel that way. Yeah. She's like the nicest person you'll ever meet. The most bubbliest person. But when I saw her, I'm like, she's got long blonde hair and a ponytail, Jordan socks, Jordan shoes, number 23, headband Jordan.
No way.
Scores
That's
like
awesome.
30 points a game. Like, it was crazy. Wild. And so we go to an open gym, and my brother's hanging out with us at the time. He's like, hey, what about her? I'm like, who? He's like, the only girl at this open gym. Who do you think? Sarah. Nah. He's like, dude, you're crazy. You're crazy for not asking her out. So we became friends, and then I started getting the feelings for her, and it terrified me because I was like, I've never done this Christian thing before. Well, we started hanging out, became friends, and then we started dating, and we both bonded over this. She was being drawn in by Christ at the same time.
Cool.
And so in that, we both started trying to discover, like, who is God? Who is this Jesus? And so we're reading through the Bible together and going through all those books that we don't understand. And so for about 6 months, it was just like, I'm reading stuff that I'm not entirely sure I understand. So,
but you're reading and you're seeking. I'm super fascinated by that, particularly because I know you can't explain it because you can't explain supernatural things. But I just love the sheer part of your story that it wasn't a church program. It wasn't a pastor. It wasn't someone talking to you about it as much. It was generally just God drawing you to himself.
That's when I look back on that's it. Like, by God's grace, he drew me to himself.
Yeah.
And that's that. So yeah,
which is who God is and what God does and can do.
Right.
And I don't say this to downplay our call to be laborers in the harvest or anything, but we've kind of said before, like, God doesn't technically need us.
Yeah, sure.
Like,
yeah.
You know, we've probably been all asked as pastors, we've probably been asked a question like, well, what about those people that never hear the gospel? I mean, are you asking about what about those people that never hear us talk?
Right.
Well, we're not that big of a deal.
Mm.
God, I just love hearing those stories because that's there's so much confidence in that. It's like, why are we feeling like somehow it's on our shoulders?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now we have a calling for sure. We're called to go out and, take his word, take the gospel to the ends of the earth. But God still is God.
It removes the tension I think a lot of people feel, and even I feel, maybe you guys do the same as a pastor, like the idea of sharing the gospel, sharing our faith. I think a lot of times the hesitation comes from, but I don't know how to save them. Right? Like, I don't know how. It's like, hey, none of us are called to save.
Nope.
We're called to just live out, be examples, be open, be honest, but it is not your responsibility, our responsibility to go and save someone. That is the work of God.
100%.
And I think that's, I don't know, I just think that's a tension point for a lot of people of like, well, I don't know what happens when I get to that point. Just be you. Like, it's, I don't know, you're not called to save someone.
Yeah, and I would say, like, for my grandparents, my mom's parents, like, they loved me and my brother. And sure, when they had opportunities, they would pray with us. But I can't remember, like, a single, like, when we went to church, I don't remember a single sermon. I don't remember any of that. I remember that my grandparents loved me and that they would talk about Jesus. And that was it.
Dude,
And
that's so cool.
So even if it's, like, at a minimum, like, some people think, oh, well, I'm not doing much. Well, it's just like when Scripture talks about, hey, just because you're not the hand doesn't make you any less valuable. So even that, like, even a little bit is a ton that God can use, right?
Yeah.
So I resonate with that. Like, God can do whatever he wants.
Yeah. And it really does. It really kind of laser focus us back to what Jesus tells us anyway. I mean, so I think of your grandma. Well, she just embraced the two things she was called to do. She loved the Lord her God with all her heart, soul, and mind, and she loved you and your brother as she would want to be loved and as Jesus loved.
Yeah.
Well, that's all we're told to do. That's the bulk of it. And it's like, that's because God is God. We're not. Like I said, we can't change a life. We can't fix a life. We have no power. But we have this, we have the good news. I mean, the gospel means good news. We have this, and we just want to love you till you experience Jesus.
Yeah.
He'll do all the other stuff. He does everything else.
Right.
And
so good.
I know every pastor listening, probably their heart sank a little bit when you said it wasn't a message that saved them. So, sorry, all pastors. I know. We're all pastors in the room now. We're like, I know.
Don't go tell the board what you just said.
That's right. And don't stop writing your Sunday sermon right now. Don't be like, well, it doesn't matter anyway.
Don't matter.
No more Saturday night specials. Oh, that's so good. All right, so you find that, you meet Sarah, you guys begin to really explore, which I just think there's something so beautiful about the rawness and simplicity of that. How did you begin to discover more than who Jesus was? What did he put in place in your life to reveal himself to you?
So yeah, I think along that same line of, well, what if we don't have the right words to say? Well, I think it also comes back to, like, when you're new in the faith, you're not going to do everything right. Like, you won't. We did not. We were excited. We were learning. We were, in some ways, blissfully ignorant to, like, Christendom, I would say.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, we didn't know that there's X number of denominations. We didn't know that there were different theological perspectives on this, that, and the other. We didn't know that there was a right way to talk about the Godhead. We didn't know any of that stuff, which was nice, right? And consequently, we also joined. We just became a part of a church that had some like theological issues. And so that was part of our experience in learning. Was we were in that learning, we also had to learn like, oh, like not everyone believes the same thing. Is that good or is that bad? Well, no, I think it's good. And it's okay to make quote unquote mistakes with what you believe in your faith, because if you stay obedient to who God is and what he's asked of you and reading of his word, just like we said earlier, God can do whatever he wants. He's faithful to mature us as Christians. So that was part of our journey too, was figuring out, what does church look like? What is sound doctrine? Like, is that something we really need to emphasize, right? Because I feel like that there's two groups that would say, no, man, like once you get too into the theological stuff, you know, you've cut yourself off from God's heart. Like just, and I would say, I hear you, but that's not my experience. I've held both, right? The theological understanding of God and the experiential part of God. I think those two things go hand in hand. And so we had to experience that. We had to do that. And that allowed us to ask questions of like, oh, what about this religion? What about that religion? And it was through that I actually started to wonder, like, wait a minute, because I hadn't done it yet. What about Islam? I've never asked that question before. They believe in Jesus. Well, what does that mean? So then I had to start reading and thinking and praying and understanding, and because that's part of a lot of my family. They're Muslims, or even if they're not Muslims, that culturally they identify with Islam, and and it was a blessing because you get humbled real quick. You get humbled by the fact that just because you think you know something about somebody else or what they believe, you really need to know the person. And I think that was Jesus' message, is stop trying to identify the title, the logo, whatever they are connected to. You really need to look at that person in the eyes and say, like, who are you? What do you think? And Jesus was so good at that. So Sarah and I have been, that's part of our journey, is like trying to understand people and how God sees people, and then you have to take a look at yourself. So it was from there that I started to kind of feel this call to ministry. I didn't know what that meant. So we started going to, it's now Creekside Community Church, and Paul Holland was the pastor at the time, and at the time it was called First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. It was part of that denomination. And we came into that church, kind of church hurt from a previous experience, and him and his wife took us in and didn't do anything other than love us. And so I remember the first Sunday I walked in, he looked at me and he goes, "Hey man, you ever preached before?" And I said, and I looked, and was like, what the?
Like, no good morning or anything? That was his first question?
Well, and I was like, man, is this like...
Forget about having visitors stand up so we can say hi. Hey, first time here, you ever preach, man?
Dude, this guy, he was, man, he did not, if he saw a gift in you, he called it out right away. He was so good. So cool. From there, he would keep poking at me. And I had seen enough of like what pastors have to go through and deal with it. I was like, I don't want any part of that. Okay. I'm good with being a witness in the world. And he said, no, you're being called to ministry. So sometime later he gets diagnosed with a brain tumor, and he passed away 7 months later. And even in that 7 months, he would call me, he would check on me, he would ask how I was doing. He would remind me like, hey man, I really think you should consider doing ministry, maybe eventually go to seminary and stuff. And I said, we'll see. So he passed away, and it was at his celebration of life that I gave a few words, and his wife had come up to me and said, "So, when are you gonna do this?" And I said, "Okay, I'll do it." "Wait, really?" And I said, "Yeah, no, he's right. I should be doing this." So signed up for online classes through Liberty University, and then just kind of started that journey while doing construction. And about a couple years into that, started searching for ministry jobs because I was really feeling it heavy on my heart. Like, man, I have to get it. That feeling of I'm not doing what God has asked of me type thing. And lo and behold, there was an opening at Faith Reformed Church, and we were like, really? Okay. And because Sarah and I, once COVID hit, Sarah and I had started wondering about, hey, should we start looking at other places to go to church, or do we need to consider like moving for ministry? And so that's when I was like, well, let's check it out. And it popped up, and I applied, not thinking I was going to get the job.
Right.
Absolutely, I was like, oh, I'm not going to get the job. I have absolutely no experience. 4 months later, they hired me, and had no idea what I was doing. So I called this guy, and I said, "Dude, I don't know what I'm doing." And he's like, "You'll figure it out."
Yeah.
And I was like, "How can you just say that?" He's like, "You'll see."
Because none of us actually know what we're doing.
Don't go tell your boys that either.
There's the pastoral secret.
That's the best pastoral advice, the best parenting advice. No one actually knows what they're doing.
Yeah, you figure it out.
We're just figuring it out.
Yep. And so, figuring it out, but would not want to do anything else.
Yeah.
Like I literally could not see myself doing anything else. In fact, my wife would say, "You probably shouldn't do anything else because you talk a lot." You're right.
No, there was definitely a trust in, and I think you've kind of mentioned a couple times through your experience, like your desire to love people and to know people. That's where the advice of "you'll figure it out" came from, because like that is the foundation, I think, of any quality, like called to ministry, like individual, is their desire to know people first and to love people first. And so I think that's very evident in what you do and in the ministry that you do. And it's been fun the last couple of years to kind of run around and do things together. So the question I did have for you, because we're in a similar boat, and there's always that tension of doing ministry in your hometown. And I don't remember the verse on the top of my head, but there's definitely it talks about the scripture, like the prophet in their hometown. And it's like, I don't know, have you felt the tension of that? But also then there's also I see the also benefit of hometown. What's that been like for you?
Man, that's a good question. I think actually it's been a blessing, because you come back, we all know this, you come back around and running into people throughout life, and you get an opportunity that you never thought you'd have. And so I say it's a blessing because I get to say what I do now. And I don't know what people's reactions are to that, because everyone had a different experience than me in high school.
Right.
But I do know that when I say that, it allows me to almost feel thankful, like because I don't get to start over somewhere else. I have to be here where I've had basically my entire life, the good things, the bad things, the things that I've done well, and all the mistakes that I've had. Yeah. And it's like, okay, you're going to have to own that.
Yeah.
All that pre-Christ stuff, you got to own that.
Yeah.
And you just and I'm thankful because like 2 Corinthians says, I will boast all the more in my weaknesses, because it's when I'm weak, then I'm made strong because of Christ, right? And I'm paraphrasing that, but right, it's through Christ, it's through His grace and His mercy and His power through me that it's like I got to depend on that.
Yeah.
Whether I did something good or bad.
Well,
so.
you're a living example for the people that knew your pre-Jesus version of what redemption looks like, of what life change looks like, what Jesus can do. and so you get to kind of live that testimony out, which is super cool. And I think both of you have that opportunity.
Yeah,
being in your hometown.
What about you?
No, I'd agree. I think that's how I felt the whole time, because there's the benefits of understanding culture and understanding, like, you know, even our conversation before this, of just things of like how Traverse City is and where people are coming from and their viewpoints. You know, I think on my side there is the tension of like, okay, people who also didn't leave, they just know me.
Right.
And it's like that. There's always that subtle thought of like, did old me ruin any new opportunity? But I think there's this reality of what you said, like even what Chris mentioned about the redemption side of things, of like, look what God can do. And even back to what we've been already talking about, of like that idea of there was not someone who saved me or changed me. It's what God did. And I think, I don't know, you, myself, others who are kind of in that space get to be that example of like, look what God did and look what he can do. So yeah, I don't know. I love being home. Like, that's the thing. Like, it's nice to be here and to, even have people who I've known from the past see their redemption stories through Christ and all that. And so, yeah.
I've had similar experiences. One time I was in the airport. A girl I hadn't seen since high school, Sam, and I like turned around and I saw her, and I was like, "Hey," and the last I knew of her, like no joke, she like disappeared, went off to the West Coast, and I was like, "How you doing? How you been?" She's like, "I've had a crazy life," and she basically was like, "I got into like all of the worst things that you could probably get into." And I believed her, because the last time I saw her, she looked like skin and bones, and she was just like glowing. Like, and I said, "Well, what happened?" She's like, "Jesus."
Wow.
Jesus.
How cool is that?
She didn't even know that I was
How
in
cool
ministry.
Is that,
and so she's like just sharing her life with me, not knowing anything of that. It was just like great. Yeah, right. So same thing even for someone like that.
Yeah. So good.
That is so good. I just appreciate your story so much. I love the reminder to all of us, because you're one of several, I won't say many, but several stories I've heard over the years from someone who had no real God background, even to one point of somebody that was a hardcore committed atheist, and the thing that turned them around, the thing that drew them in, along with it being God, was not a great debate or a great message or someone knocking on their door. It wasn't a tract. It was an individual God put in their life who just kept loving them. Right. In fact, I had one acquaintance say that for him, it got to the point where he was working so hard not to believe in God, but he could not deny this love of Jesus. He couldn't stop it, no matter how hard he fought it.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, like Andrew said, you know, we often feel this pressure. I got to have the right thing to say, or I got to know Bible verses, or I got to. No, you don't need any of that. There will come time for those conversations, hopefully. But we all have people in our lives, and if you're listening, I'm sure you have more than one person in your life that is far from God. You've been praying for them. You're wanting them to discover Jesus. Okay, cool. Just keep loving them.
Yeah.
Just keep loving them. Consistently live out your Jesus belief, for sure, but keep loving them, and let God do what God does. Let God do that. God's knocking on the door. We're not there with him. God's not knocking while we're ringing the doorbell, right? I mean, God's knocking on the door.
Yeah.
He's going to do what only God can do, and I just think that's a great reminder for us.
It is. Yep.
So that's super cool. Well, I know there's more, actually, Sam, to your story, because you've got some other pretty dynamic things that have gone down, and some other things where you've kind of experienced God's faithfulness. And so we'll probably just have to have you back again. I think that's what we'll have to do.
Yeah.
Because we can't unpack it all in one session. And the good thing is you're local. So, you know, we can just pay you off with, some Bubba's lunch or something like that.
I'm in. Dude.
You're in for that? Is that all it takes?
Yeah.
Is Bubba's or
That's
Slaptown?
it. No,
Slaptown,
yep,
whatever.
I'm good.
So awesome, man. Hey, well, thank you very much
Yeah,
for spending time with us today,
That's good.
man. Thanks for sharing your story.
Mhm.
If you're listening, we hope today was just a little bit of an encouragement for you, a little bit of something for you to dig into here in the middle of your week. If you have not done so, click subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. We're on all the major platforms. That way you just never miss an episode, because we are here with you each and every Wednesday. We look forward to this time and appreciate you spending your time with us. So for this week, it's Andrew, Samuel, and Chris. Appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you next time around.